Okay, so Phil, we're getting closer to the wire here. We
Are we?
so
Well, I don't think we do the Scott. We
yeah, we
don't do
don't
the
do the.
wire.
You're right, we don't do the wire. Wire didn't actually have that much great music, from what I recall.
No, actually, that was, and I think that had something to do with why the show ultimately fell a little short for me, even though that's a silly
Yeah,
complaint, I know.
no, it might be true of me as well. But we are sort of winding down. I don't know. We have a dozen or so left to
I
go.
counted. We have
Not a
10,
dozen chats, but a
10,
dozen
exactly
songs,
10
maybe
after
10.
this.
Okay, so we can probably wrap it up in a few discussions or whatever, hopefully. But
Yeah.
you've chosen two. I guess they're both from the aughts, the 6 Feet Under and the Leftovers. In fact, they say are they both post 2010, or I don't. I've lost the
No,
chronology.
they're
I don't remember
quite,
when they are.
the timeline's quite different. Actually,
Okay,
oddly enough, I checked the dates just before we came on. 6 Feet Under is very early, 2001 to
okay.
2005. I could be wrong, but I think it was maybe like the second prestige TV. I hate saying that.
Probably very
Um,
early, yeah.
Show after the Sopranos to get attention. I always say
Yeah.
it was. I became aware of it, even though, and I always was intrigued by it when I flipped around. And I know that I think I caught. I used to love the opening credit music, and I think probably flipping around, I had heard that. I said, I gotta watch that. I gotta watch it. It comes very early, and then the leftovers doesn't come along until 2014. So there's
Hmm.
more than a decade between the two. But I think they fit together so well because I was thinking about this. You know, they both start with death. The very first episode, deaths that really linger for the entirety of the show's runs. Now they're very different. The leftovers starts with what, 2% of the world dying,
Hmm.
whereas in 6 Feet Under, it's one death. It's Nathan. It's the father, Nathan Fisher Sr. And yet that death haunts the whole show. And the same thing with the leftovers. So they fit together well. I watched both of them at the beginning of the pandemic. The leftovers, for obvious reasons, I'm sure we've talked about. 6 Feet Under just kind of struck the right mood. And I love both shows. You got me onto the leftovers, and I'm really glad you did. And even when I started rewatching bits and parts to get ready for this, suddenly I want to watch the whole. I want to sit down and watch them both again and
Yeah.
I've already watched 6 Feet Under like 4 or 5 times, and the leftovers 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
They're just such intriguing, unusual shows.
And 6 Feet Under's only 4 seasons, you said?
Um, no, no, actually, it's the reverse. 6 Feet Under was five
Ah,
seasons.
okay.
The leftovers is only three. I'd forgotten.
Three.
It was a
Yeah.
fairly
Yeah.
short thing. Now, I have a feeling that 6 Feet Under might have been one of those shows that had a weird scheduling thing because of the writer's strike that went on at the time,
Mm,
which affected Friday Night Lights. When does Friday Night Lights? Now that maybe that's later. Maybe it wasn't affected by the writer's strike.
okay.
Anyway, no, it had a 5 year run and leftovers only 3 years. So let me start with 6 Feet Under because it came first. And for me, it literally came first. I watched it before The Sopranos, watched it before Mad Men, watched it before anything. It was the first, not counting Larry Sanders, which is kind of different, the first show of the modern era of TV that I sat down and watched from beginning to end because I lucked into a box set at a flea market, I think, or the one at Dixie that I used to go to. In terms of music, music is important to the show, became more important. Wasn't a big deal early on, although I've already mentioned that I loved the theme music at the beginning. It just had, I think, one of the great opening credits, like even better than Mad Men's opening credits, I think better than The Sopranos opening credits. Um, so I listed 5 songs in order, and they're really spread out over the course of the show's. If it starts it's actually a 6 year run. If it starts in 2001, ends in 2000. Is that a 5 year run? One, two, three. Having trouble with my
The
ordinal
math teacher.
cardinal numbers. Yeah, 5 year run. They're spread out. So the first thing, and I know you've seen this clip. I think we may have talked about it in another context. It's from the episode called "The Room." And it's an episode where Nate Sr. dies in the first episode, played by Richard Jenkins. He's great in the show. And then he hangs around for like the next 3 or 4 seasons. He's dead, but he keeps popping in to make wry, sardonic comments about his two sons and everything that goes on around. And, people commune with him. He's dead, but they see him and they talk to him. And it's this episode where Nate discovers that his father had this whole separate life. He used to rent out a room. He finds out because I think they're doing taxes or something. They're going over the books. The mother, Ruth, is keeping the books, and they find all these weird payments to some variety store or something. Or I think it might have been an Indian restaurant even. And it turns out that Nathan, it was a quid pro quo thing where he would get used to this room, and I think he provided services for the family. Maybe he did a burial for them or something. And Nate, he goes to the room, he finds out about this, and he walks in the room and he flashes back and he learns about his father's kind of hidden life from the entirety of the family. He just used this room as a getaway. And if you know the family, you can understand why. And all the stuff that he does takes place. We see it. And the song that plays, he finds the pile of records that Nate Sr. kept. And that's the context we talked about this. It's a great playing records right on film scene. He puts the record on the turntable, and it's the Amboy Dukes' Journey to the Center of the Mind. Song I've always loved. It's on Nuggets.
Yeah.
And then I think it was Stephen Rubio and I that tried to figure out what album he was playing, because where he dropped the tone arm, it wasn't it wasn't Nuggets, and you could see the label, and I have it on a weird Michigan Rocks compilation.
I have that album.
Do you have that album too?
Yeah.
I can't even remember what else is on it. I think like
two MC5 songs. I think
there's one of those metal bands, Frost. Maybe
I think they're
on
it. And Ramblin' Gambling Man.
Yeah. Anyway, we couldn't figure out what album it's on. The flashback is great. The song plays. We find out that he'd go there to smoke dope. He's dancing. He's like doing the hippie sun grope, and it keeps it. It does like guitar type jump cuts or fade ins and fade outs. He would bring in hookers there. He would hang around with bikers. It's just amazing. In terms of what we know about Nate Sr. to that point, we just know him as an undertaker, like a pretty straight guy. He has, like I say, a very wry sense of humor, but we don't know, and Nate doesn't know, that he has this whole separate life. And it fits the music perfectly, and you get a good 2 or 3 minutes of it, I think, really loud and clear. It's on YouTube. If anybody's intrigued by the show and has never watched it, look up Amboy Duke 6 Feet Under, and you'll get a real flavor for the show. So when I wrote the entry for our blog, that's the song I focused on, because I did one of those preemptive entries where I started writing. When I posted the entry, I was only into season 2, and that was far and away up to that point the best use of music. But it turned out by the time I put together for the book, I chose something else, which is the next song. Season 2, episode 8. The episode's called "It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year," and it starts with, as you may or may not know, almost every 6 Feet Under episode, at least for the first 3 seasons, it was kind of the show's calling card. I think they stopped after a while. They would start with this usually a very unusual death. Characters you don't know. Somebody that's going to end up in the Fisher and Sons funeral home. But we'd start with the actual death. So you get all these, every manner of strange death. And that's one of the real impressions the show had on me, believe it or not, because after I watched 6 Feet Under, I would constantly be thinking of that show, and I'd be in some situation and I'd think, yeah, some weird thing could happen right now, and I could die. Or I remember I was with Sam Sorrell, and we were in the back with a chainsaw, and I thought of 6 Feet Under, like he could drop that chainsaw and one of us dies. And that's one of the ways the show affected me. In this episode, The Most Wonderful Time of the Year, it starts with a mall Santa Claus, this big guy, and he's just leaving his house, and he's got his uniform on, and he kisses his wife goodbye. She looks I don't think they're bikers yet, but she's got sort of a bikerish look to her. But they're clearly in love, very affectionate. He goes out and some kids are waving at him, and he waves back, and he gets plowed by a car. I think he's on his bike. He's Santa Claus on a motorbike. It's a great episode because they have the funeral at the Fisher home. They get to meet the wife, who's just really memorable woman, and all these bikers come to the funeral, and they just take over the funeral home. It's Christmas, and they're trying to have a Fisher family dinner, and the dinner is very filled with tension. Everybody's snapping at each other, but meanwhile, the bikers want to stay late into the evening. And there's so much music in this episode. These bikers, they're playing. It's like a primer to Southern rock.
Wow.
They're playing the Marshall Tucker Band and the Allman Brothers, and you name and Lynyrd Skynyrd, of course. You name every famous piece of Southern rock, and it gets aired in this episode. It's great.
Wow.
And at one point, Nate talks to the wife, and he has this great conversation with her. The party with the bikers is going on. It's a funeral home, but they're having like an old fashioned wild wake for this guy. And her and Nate have this great conversation about. And Nate, you got to know Nate to understand that he's this guy that he's very neurotic. He worries about stuff, and he gets involved with this woman, Brenda, and then he gets involved with a woman he used to be or gets re-involved with a woman that he used to be involved with in Seattle. So he's got a very odd kind of life, and he's always trying to figure things out. And this woman is very of the moment. She talks about her husband, and she says, "Oh yeah, he did everything. He lived life to the fullest, right to the end." And she makes a funny joke about the sex they had. And it turns out that Nate tells her that he used to have a bike, and she's pretty interested in that, pretty impressed. And he gave it up, like so many things, and he sort of works at the funeral home. It's not the life he wants, but he makes the best of it. Anyway, it's the next morning, and they've had this wild night with the bikers. And did you get a chance to look at the clip?
Yeah, it was good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ouch. And he comes to the breakfast table. Ruth is there making breakfast for him, his mom. And she says, "Oh, a woman stopped by." And she makes some comment. Oh, she looked a little weird. And she had a bike, and she left you this. And he doesn't know what it is. So he looks, and it's a set of keys. And immediately Blue Oyster, which is not Southern rock, but Blue Oyster Cult's Don't Fear the Reaper starts up. And it is such a great scene. A smile crosses his face. I think he clues in right away what the keys mean. She has left him her husband's bike. It's parked in the driveway. And he goes out and he takes it for a ride. And Blue Oyster Cult's playing. And I'll mention another movie where the same song is not as prominent, but kind of memorable. And, one of the great songs of the 70s, we had it in Sedated, looking for the right film or the right TV show, and it's just perfect. And I said in the book that I think it was sort of the last time. I'm probably wrong. You'd have to really track it closely, but it feels like it was the last time Nate felt completely happy and free. After that, he just gets into one mess after another, usually with either his current girlfriend or the other woman he ends up having a child with. And his life becomes very complicated, and especially in terms of his health. And that 2 minutes where he's out on the highway and the song's playing, it's just great. The other film that uses Don't Fear the Reaper, and it's not really prominent, and yet in terms of period, it's just perfect. It's Halloween. Jamie Lee Curtis, where before all the mayhem happens, two of the girls are just out riding. I think they're smoking a joint, and over the radio, Blue Oyster Cult's playing. And that would be just, the film came out in 78. So that's like within 2 years or 3 years of the song. That's kind of memorable, but not as good as 6 Feet Under. That's the best use of that song ever. So that is season, sorry, just checking my list. That's season 2. Now, I sent you one tonight. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it. It's season 3, episode 3. David and his partner, the cop, David, Keith. They're just driving along, and they argue a lot. David's trying to focus on his choirs doing Rocket Man, and he's trying to focus on that. And they're having a happy moment. Keith compliments David on his singing. Then they get in, they start sniping at, or Keith snipes at David a lot because he kept them an extra hour. They're in a traffic jam. So you get a little bit of them singing along to Rocket Man, a tape of David's choir playing. Then they argue, and the argument really doesn't go anywhere. It just kind of peters out. And this is what made the episode and the scene memorable for me. It's the last scene. Then you go to the end credits, and the song morphs into the real Elton John. It goes from Keith and David singing to the actual Elton John recording. It's just done really well.
Yeah, I like that.
And it reminded me kind of, yeah, I'm sure they couldn't help but have Almost Famous on their mind, which is funny. I played that for a class today, Scott, not to get off track, but I was looking for a birthday, and it was Kate Hudson's birthday.
Right.
And I played, it was grade 8 class, and I played the Tiny Dancer scene. And it was great. They were really watching and paying attention. And I love to talk about that scene.
Yeah.
And I found myself very moved by, I know this is off topic, very moved by where William said, "I need to get home." And she goes, "You are home."
Yeah. That's great.
So I think this 6 Feet Under scene probably had that scene in mind. Short scene, but really done well. And I also sent you season 5, episode 10. One of the most important episodes, just to give you some context, it's the episode where they bury Nate, the son. He has ongoing health issues right from season 2. I think he has this weird condition. It's a brain thing where he can just start to, I can't remember what it's called, but it's sort of almost a form of epilepsy where he just starts talking nonsense, and it can kill him. And finally in season 5, it does. And they bury him, and Claire, his sister, who is often the focus of the show. Sometimes I like her. She can be very annoying. She's like some of the other daughters in some of these other shows. Sometimes you just can't stand them because of the way they act, and other times they're sort of the character you feel closest to. She has a flashback to David when she's much younger. And I got to admit, though, I sent you the clip. The scene did make me laugh because David, he's sitting listening to Nirvana's All Apologies. And Claire's probably about 12 or 13 or 11 or something. And what is it? Kurt Cobain died. And he's in tears. And then he said he was too pure for this world.
Yeah.
It's a little melodramatic, but it's still effective. And then it cuts back to her modern day, or present day. And I couldn't remember. There's a woman's voice in the background. Maybe she was in therapy or something. And then it cuts to her on her bed playing All Apologies, which I liked. And what I liked even more, it cut to the mom, Ruth, who was putting to bed the daughter that Nate had with his old girlfriend, who ended up disappearing, murdered actually. And and the expression on her face, Ruth is a really interesting character, the mom. And All Apologies is still playing, and that I really like. That I find good. That was a nice use of All Apologies. And finally, you can't talk about, and it's in some ways it's not a good song at all. It might be the worst song I talk about in this whole series of Zooms we've done. And yet it's memorable, and it's famous, and it's one of the most famous endings of any TV show. It's the last episode, season 5. They use a song called "Breathe Me" by Sia, S-I-A. Do you know anything about her?
I think I know the song. I can't recall how it goes, but I think it was a big hit.
Okay,
so she sounds a bit like Rihanna as a singer, right?
Sounds like one of these modern rock hits, that are just kind of faceless. It's a song I would never pay the least bit of attention to. In fact, I'm sure I dislike it. But in this scene, David has died. It's, 2 episodes. So the next episode or 2, they sort of grapple with David's death. Claire wants to go to New York to study art, and there's a lot of, mix-ups over that and arguments, whatever. Finally, she does get ready to go to New York. So she says goodbye. The family's there to say goodbye to her. And she's driving. And then the scene goes on for 6 minutes. And it does something rather unusual, which kind of, it mirrors the rest of the show. we keep moving forward in time, and we see the death of all the principal characters as this Sia song "Breathe Me" plays. It'll cut to Claire driving, but then it'll go to the death of Keith, or the death of her brother, or the death of Ruth herself, the death of Brenda, Nate's girlfriend when the show starts, the death of Brenda's brother, wildly annoying brother Billy, and also the guy that worked with them at the funeral home was a great character, and I'm blanking out on his name. He was kind of a protege of Nate's, learning the trade, and he ended up being a really important character. I should have had a list of characters. Anyway, we see everybody die, and I think the episode is called "Everybody Goes," and it's really, and if you can look past the, I always commented the terrible makeup, because they're making these characters age, and they didn't seem to pay much attention to realistic makeup, and it's shot in this kind of weird glow. But as the song plays, it's just incredibly memorable. No one who's seen that show doesn't remember the ending, and I think almost everybody likes it, whatever your feelings on the song are.
Yeah.
There's certainly an attempt to use even it's more ambitious really than any show ever in terms of what this song functions as. I mean, it's
Wow.
more ambitious than The Sopranos or Mad Men. You know, you get the song, and those are great endings, and they're much better songs. But this really aims high, and I think it pulls it off.
Wow. This sounds amazing.
Right to Claire herself. When she dies, she's like 102 years old, and they use the same actress.
Wow.
Lauren Ambrose. They just pile on the makeup. She's dead. She's 102, and the camera scans over some photos on the wall behind her, and she's got a smile on her face, and she dies. And oh, by the way, this was a style of 6 Feet Under. Every time somebody would die at the beginning of an episode, or in this collage at the end, you get a title card, just completely white, black type, the person's name, and then in brackets,
Okay.
year died.
Yeah.
So that would be interspersed through this whole sequence. Now, you know, if you ever do watch the show, I've totally ruined it, because I was lucky enough that when I watched it, I had no idea this was coming. And it's like, I'm thinking, wow, this is amazing.
Wow.
So I think those were the most memorable. There were other uses here and there in 6 Feet Under. I think Radiohead, they were kind of like Friday Night Lights in that they would use stuff from the 90s,
Contemporary or more
contemporary stuff that was pretty close to the show.
Right.
And some of it wasn't that memorable. They didn't use a lot of really famous music, I don't think, but it would pop up sometimes.